Welcome to The Weekly, a podcast brought to you by Calvary Bible Church. I'm your host, Jay Ewing, and this is an edition of the book list. Excited to be in the booth today with Melissa, and we're going to be discussing a great book, one of my favorite books of all time.
Yes, you said that last time too.
I'm sure I did. I talk like that all the time. But no, this is a great book. It's called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. We can't wait for you to jump in the conversation with us. Also, stay tuned because at the end of this podcast, we're going to tell you what we're reading next.
Woohoo!
Thanks to a great comment by Jennifer Jones.
Oh, I was just going to say one of our listeners. So it sounded a little more like, oh, they have so many listeners. Listeners are sending comments in.
Hey, I actually got a comment from a listener at the marriage retreat this weekend.
Oh,
she
nice.
said, my Bible study is doing one of the books that we reviewed last year.
What?
I know. How fun is that?
Which one was it? Do you remember?
Yeah, it is Gentle and Lowly.
Oh, good
which
one.
is one of the best books.
Seriously.
Of all time.
Yeah, of course it is.
I say that about that a lot. Ooh, the podcast reveals a lot about you.
It does.
And thankfully now my mom listens and she corrects me.
Does she hold you accountable?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I always have this filter now that my mom is listening.
The mom filter.
Yeah.
I have the Jay's mom filter.
Yeah, totally.
I just don't ask any of my parents if they listen or not.
Yeah.
And just keep it a secret.
I have John Boyle's mom filter and my mom's filter.
Nice.
Yeah. Hey, we're so glad you're listening. You can always write us at The Weekly. If you got comments, questions, if something comes to mind, if you need help, if you need prayer, you need to go to calvarybible.com. Click on connect on the mobile bulletin. That almost dropped on my head. And submit a prayer request. Let us know that you want to connect here at Calvary. Also, we have some great events happening this spring at Calvary, so go to calvarybible.com. All right, Melissa, let's talk about your love of tea.
Oh, how long do we have?
This is not a podcast about tea. But you did bring your favorite tea today.
I brought my favorite green tea today.
Okay.
So let's be a little more specific because last time we met, I texted you ahead of time and asked if you wanted a coffee, which I've never, ever, ever heard Jay say no to this question. And so I just posted as I'm going, just tell me what you want.
No doubt.
And what did you want?
A tea.
A tea. I had no idea. So this week, I'm going to bring Jay my favorite green tea because that's what you had. And I brought it. And what did you want?
Coffee. I was I almost texted you to say, can you stop and get coffee?
But yes, I did bring my favorite green tea, which is it Stan Smith? Something Smith. I like it.
Then
made
you showed
Portland.
us, and we're going to post this online. But your tea drawer
is
very organized.
Yes, it's super organized.
You know what it tells me? You're an empty nester.
I have time to organize my tea.
My tea is in a basket up high, disheveled everywhere.
Yes, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Totally.
And mine was that way, but now they're all in nice little boxes.
It's impressive. This drawer is very impressive.
Well-labeled boxes.
It's every few years we get inspired and clean out our junk drawer.
Oh, yeah.
But the tea drawer is legit.
Yeah. I'm not going to name names, but I did post a picture of it to Instagram a while back when I did it. And one of our pastor's wives messaged me and said, do not show this to my husband because we cannot lose a drawer to tea. Yeah. Because it's true. You also have to have the space to dedicate a whole.
I know what pastor we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not hard.
His mom listens occasionally.
But yes, you do also have to have the space to devote a whole drawer to tea. But
you do.
We were already there because we drank so much tea. I just wanted to organize it.
It's really impressive. Very impressive.
Thank you.
What does that say about your personality that your tea drawer is organized?
Yeah.
That's the question.
What does it say about my personality?
Yet you're fun-loving, relaxed.
In an organized way.
Okay, let's get an intro to emotionally healthy spirituality. Kick us off, Melissa, about why or who wrote this book.
Yeah, this was such a good book. Mm-hmm. So this is written by Peter Scazzero. And it follows his journey. He was a pastor in New York. Yeah. Am I right?
Very unique pastor role.
Yeah.
With a unique congregation.
Totally. And he was struggling with exhaustion, with anger, with marital issues. His wife actually said, I'm not coming to your church anymore. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Ultimately he realizes that was what needed to tip him over to doing some deep digging. But he just kept wondering why all the Christian remedies he tried weren't producing the deep positive change that he wanted in his life. And so he began digging under his quote unquote, he calls it his good Christian veneer, and discovering emotional layers in his life that he just never let other people access, for sure, and even never let Jesus access. Yeah. And so that led him to realizing the critical link between emotional and spiritual health, and diving into that eventually brought him the deep transformation that he needed in his life. So we love the tagline on this book. Do you want to read it?
The tagline. It's
so good.
It's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature.
Yeah.
And this book when it first came out, was revolutionary.
Yeah.
I know that some of the great saints before us have probably written about this subject. I'm well aware that is probably true, but he didn't put it in he put it in a context of American spirituality.
Totally.
And just a game changer of a book.
And just super relatable too, right?
Yeah.
Like using his own story and experience, and he's so vulnerable and authentic. It's refreshing.
Yeah. So there's also a layer here of some of our faith traditions, some of our listeners' faith traditions never valued emotion.
Oh, for sure.
Or it was a sin to be emotional.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
And I think, and I don't even know that that's necessarily just a spiritual tradition. I think that's American life too. Like there's an element to that's just our culture, is to value more of the positive, upbeat, outgoing, wonderful things. My life is great. My life is wonderful. I have no sadness. I have no, and not to let ourselves dwell like we need to in some of those sadder emotions.
No doubt.
In times in our lives, not all the time. But.
And this is a book is not about him dwelling in sad emotions, but him saying that in order to be mature in Christ, you must deal with your emotions.
Yeah, you are an emotional being. And he talks about how we're made in the image of God, and that there's different aspects to us as human beings, that we're intellectual beings, we're physical beings, we're social beings, we're spiritual beings, we're emotional beings. And that's all because we're made in God's image. I mean, we find that all in the Bible. The Bible talks about our emotions. It talks about us as emotional beings. And so when we do discipleship, and whether we're talking about discipling others or working on discipleship in our own life, we have to touch on all those parts. If we're unapproachable or proud, defensive, judgmental, it doesn't matter how much Bible you know or how much you pray or how active you are in church. You're just a spiritual infant because you're not reaching those depths. It's like an iceberg, and you're only touching that top 10% instead of anything below the surface.
Now, he's famous for that picture,
which is a good analogy.
Yeah, and explain that sort of. I mean, we're on a podcast, so it's sort of hard to.
Yeah, let me draw it on the board for you.
Yeah, totally. But it is a picture.
Well, we've all seen Titanic, so think about the Titanic iceberg. No, I think this is an analogy I think everybody's pretty familiar with. We talk about it in lots of different ways. But, the top 10% of the iceberg that you see, that's what we're showing the world around us generally, in general. And there's still 90% below the surface. And when we're just not in touch with our emotions, but trying to, quote unquote, do spiritual things to affect that lower 90%, we're only touching a portion of it. We're not really going deep into all the places. But when we marry those two things, our emotional health and our spiritual health, that's when we're able to get all 100%.
Yeah, we see this throughout the Bible too. One of the most specific examples I could say was the Psalms. The Psalms are teaching us how to be human, how to engage with the human things that happen to us.
Yeah.
Disappointment with God, with others, political unrest, just family issues, all the things that we would run into in our normal everyday life. And the psalmist in Psalm 139 says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. And I think that's so important for us to remember that part of our faith is sitting before the Lord and letting him speak not only to our spiritual health, but our emotional health.
Yeah, for sure. And he kind of, he gives us a nice top 10 list here.
Oh, no, this is really, man, this is the top 10 symptoms of a emotionally unhealthy spirituality. And let me read these because I think they're really important and sort of makes a context for why we read this book and why we would recommend this book. Here's his top 10 for unhealthy spirituality. Using God to run from God.
Ouch.
Yeah, seriously. Ignoring the emotions of anger, sadness, and fear. Dying to the wrong things. I can't tell you how many times I've died to the wrong things.
Well, because there's things that are easier to die to, and we'd rather die to those than the things that are hard.
Yeah. Denying the past impact on the present. Dividing our lives into secular and sacred compartments. Doing for God instead of being with God. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Spiritualizing away conflict. I can't tell you how many pastoral appointments that is
revolve
one of the keys.
Around that. Yeah,
spiritualizing.
Sure. Yeah.
Covering our brokenness, weakness, and failure. Living without limits, which I've got to say, he has a podcast called Emotionally Healthy Disciple.
Yeah.
And
a book too.
And a book. But the podcast, he has a few episodes about living within limits and without limits. Fantastic stuff. So go find that.
Totally. And it's amazing. Like something that I've been reading about lately is how living with limits actually limits our anxiety. It's when we live our life without limits that anxiety shows up in big ways in our life, which is like,
that should be a quote of quotes.
Sorry.
You should say that
totally
again.
Not even.
I know, but you said it.
Can I say it again?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So living our life without limits is what leads to anxiety in our life. And when we live our life with limits or within limits, then that's what leads us to less anxiety, let's say. Not anxious free, but less anxiety.
I'm going to hit the music. We're going to pray and get ourselves out here. That's awesome. Yeah. Melissa, that's amazing. Okay, judging other people's spiritual journey. My goodness, right?
Yeah.
People.
Yes, those were all really good. He had a quote in here about judging spiritual journeys that, oh man, because I read this a couple months ago. You recommended it, and I know it came out in 2006, but I'm always a little late to the game. And it just went over and over in my head where he says, every time you make an assumption about someone, you believe a lie about them in your head. And I thought, gosh, what are the lies that I'm believing about people? And when we take time to know stories and get to know people, that's when all that stuff kind of breaks down.
Okay, that was another truth bomb.
Okay, sorry.
You're sitting in wisdom today. Maybe because you read this book.
Probably.
Hey, he says this, and this is one of my favorite quotes. God never asks us to annihilate the self. Mm-hmm. How often do we feel like that is the main theme of like what preachers have asked, what Bible studies have asked of us, right?
To shut off those emotional parts of ourselves.
Yeah, we are not to become non-persons when we become Christians. The very opposite is true. God intends our deep, truer self, which he created, to blossom freely as we follow him.
Yeah.
And he quotes this, 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, the old has gone, the new has come. And I can't just tell you like how much freedom that means that like God created you, myself, in an image that has a personality, that has gifts and talents that God wants to blossom into freedom with him.
Right. And that having that emotional health and pursuing that actually powerfully anchors us to the love of God. It's not separate from our relationship with God or our spirituality or our Christian life, whatever we want to call it, but it powerfully anchors us to that. And he talks about in another place, the same kind of true self with Jesus, and that, Jesus wasn't selfless. He didn't live as if only other people counted. He knew he had value and worth. He had friends. He asked people to help him. But at the same time, he wasn't selfish. He did not live as if nobody else counted. He gave his life out of love for others and from a place of true loving union with the Father. He had a mature, healthy, true self, which is what we want to, that's what we strive for, right? To be like Jesus.
And if you're interested in that specific quote, Pastor Pete, that's how he affectionately likes to be called.
Oh, I thought maybe that was just what you called him.
No,
I didn't have special permission for that.
He wrote another follow-up book that just came out, I think last year, 2 years ago. It's Emotional Help the Disciple, maybe even the last year. And that book, because I'm reading it right now, is the balance between Martha and Mary.
Oh,
so
interesting.
When you're reading that quote about Jesus, it sort of makes sense.
Selfish, selfless. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of where that whole balance of hanging out with Jesus is.
Yeah.
With Martha and Mary. And, Pastor Pete should be trusted. I like him a lot.
Pastor Pete.
Yeah.
I like that.
Okay, so another part that I really thought was, this whole book is fantastic, but one of the things I think that we can all learn from, especially going into, depending on when you listen to this podcast, we're going into the book of James.
Yeah,
in our context,
I'm excited about that.
Our culture here at Calvary. And he has a really unique thing that I've never seen before, and it's St. Benedict's ladder of humility.
And there's nothing Jay loves more than a saint.
And there's nothing more than a 5-step program. In the 6th century, developed a 12-step ladder for growing in grace of humility. His goal was perfect love and transforming of our entire personality. And that's, as we think about the Christian life, humility is one of the key ingredients to being led and leading others. And I just think the St. Benedict's ladder of humility, which is quite later in the book, is pretty amazing. And so, let me just read step 1 is like fear of God and the recognition of him. Yeah. Step 2 is doing God's will, not our own or others' people's. Step 3 is willing to subject ourselves to the direction of others. Step 4, patient to accept the difficulty of others. Step 5, radical honesty to others about our weakness and faults. Step 6, deeply aware of being chief of all sinners.
It's Thomas's favorite phrase.
He might be on step 6. Step 7, speaking less. Step 8, transformed into the love of God.
Yeah.
And that ladder right there.
It's so good.
Yeah. And it reminds me of the Beatitudes, right?
Right.
Just Jesus unfolding what it means to participate in the kingdom. And St. Benedict, what it means to really grow in a true humility of Christ.
And I think that's one of the things I really appreciated about this book is I think sometimes there are books that I've read in the past that are a lot of theory and not a lot of hands-on practice. And I think he does a great job of giving us those hands-on, like how to move forward. Like, don't just read this and know like, oh, I need to be more in touch with my emotional self, but how do I do that? Like he gives some good steps for that. And the prayers at the end of each chapter are just like straight to the point. They're so good.
Yeah. You really like that part of this book, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I thought that was super helpful. Sometimes when you read those in books, they're cheesy. They're hard to.
I often think that. And so I force myself to really I'm guilty of sometimes skipping over them. Anyone else? Raise your hand. No. But I really intentionally reading this book that I'm going to take these and, pray that through my day, not just in the moment read it, but really take that prayer to heart and, ruminate on it for a while.
That sounds like you're further up the ladder than I am.
I don't know about that.
Of humility, St. Benedict. Yo, St. Benedict. Okay. So there's some, obviously we're fans of this book, but in the back half, he really goes into detail of some of the really critical things I think that will lead to emotional health, which he thinks it will lead to emotional health.
And you really liked one of them. Which one was it?
The central elements of the daily office. Now, that doesn't mean you show up and go to work. The daily office is a very classical Christian expression for practicing a daily quiet time.
Yeah.
In the modern day.
Yeah.
That's what we would call.
It's like a structured way to approach it every day.
No doubt. And some of the central themes I think that are super important, especially in the 21st century, is 1, stopping. 2, centering. That means being attentive, open, sitting still, sitting straight, recognizing God's presence, right? Mm-hmm. 3, silence. So that's a very key ingredient to the daily office. So your daily devotions.
Yeah.
4, of course, scripture, getting the scriptures in you.
Yeah.
Participating and reading them, enjoying them, meditating on them. And actually, I just read a book I was just reading by one of my favorites, Eugene Peterson, and he says meditation's like a dog with a new bone.
Oh, I love it.
It's that just gnawing on something for
Yeah.
a long time. And that's what he says that's your scripture reading should be.
And they're so focused, because that's what I give to my dogs when I don't like have Bible study at my house and like, here, take this bone, go out in the backyard.
Yeah.
And then they're like just focused on that and nothing else. Doesn't matter what happens.
That's how he says. And, you know, he gives a couple other things that are really important ingredients for the daily office. But I think that's super important for us, especially in our fast-paced reality, right?
Yeah.
Stopping, centering, which means be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. That's Psalm 37:7. Silence and scripture. And those are just really good recommendations for us.
They are good. And I like how he ends with something that's kind of been inspiring to you and I.
Yeah. We're going to tell you more about that, actually.
Yeah. So the last chapter is about developing a rule of life, which sounds kind of intimidating. Do you want to
a rule of life,
define what it is?
Very simply, is an intentional, concise plan to keep God at the center of everything we do. And we've talked about this in other podcasts. This has sort of been a percolation.
Because what we like to say is that you have a rule of life, whether you know it or not. You have something that is pushing your everyday activities.
No doubt.
And if you're not identifying it, then that's where you're wasting energy.
Yep. And the starting point and the foundation of any rule of life is a desire to be with God and to love him. Mm-hmm. That's the intention of rule of life.
I like thinking about a rule versus a law, like if you've ever thought of those two things. So a rule is more self-imposed and flexible, and a law is other-imposed and rigid. So there are some people that don't like to have laws imposed upon them. I don't know if you knew this. Is this news to you?
No way.
I know.
Not in America.
I know. So it kind of gives you a different way of thinking about it. It's a self-imposed where you're setting some limits for yourself, like we talked about earlier, around how you structure your life and the things that you do every day.
That's so good, Melissa. So what is sort of the game plan? Since we're Rule of Life, we've sat down, we actually have the next book we're going to read.
Yes. So based on our feedback from some of our listeners, we were told that maybe it would be nice to know the book in advance, which I love the idea of knowing that. So Jay and I kind of sat down and thought through a way to approach this next year of reading in a thoughtful manner. And we're going to systematically look at 7 different areas of our life in order to work through developing our own rule of life.
Yeah. And so what Melissa and I hope to do in our own lives, in our own family lives, is to create a rule of life that you get to sort of sneak peek into how we're wrestling with these things, how we're implementing a rule of life for our lives.
Yeah. And I don't think, it kind of goes without saying it's going to look different. Mm-hmm. Jay has young children at home. I'm an empty nester-ish.
Yep.
And
you have boomerangers?
Sometimes you have boomerangers. It just happens.
This happens.
So, but that's just how a rule of life is. Like, it's a working document that's always going to be changing depending on where you're at in life, what's happening with your family, what's happening with you. And that's where the flexibility piece of that comes on.
Yeah. It's a season to season idea of just holding it loosely, but also setting some intentions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our next book is called Crafting a Rule of Life.
Yeah, and we'll link it in the show notes along with this book and the podcast of Pastor Pete. I think those are really important resources, but you can read along. That is sort of a workbook. So someone thinks that's a regular, like, normal book. That is a real workbook.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah, that has these sections, right? Mm-hmm. So what sections the 7, you give me that look like.
No. I just have to pull up a different note. I have it. I'm ready. Go ahead, ask.
No, there's some areas in our lives we're going to look at.
Right.
And we're going to read upon.
Yep.
In this year. We're hoping you listen to us and join in the conversation, read along with us.
Right.
And we'd love to hear from you about what you're learning as you craft a rule of life with us.
So those 7 areas are abiding. The second is your mind, then your body, the gift of being yourself, the truest thing about you. The 4th is relationships. Mm-hmm. The 5th is rest, which I think is going to hit some people hard. Mm-hmm. Rest is a tricky one. The 6th is work and money, and the 7th is gospel and hospitality.
Yeah, and those will make sense as we unfold it over the next year of how that will look in your life, how it will look in our lives.
Yep.
As we vulnerably step into this process, because we don't just preach something, we practice what we preach.
Yep.
As much as we can.
Totally. And we have not pre-crafted this rule of life.
No.
This is all on the fly.
And I've been thinking about this for years. And
Jay has pre-crafted his rule of life.
No, I haven't pre-crafted. I've wrestled with this idea because one of the things about the rule of life is you're supposed to create yours in community.
Yeah.
And I never had community to debrief what was going on.
Yeah.
And how to sort of flesh that out.
Yeah, so I like that.
We hope you join us in this process.
Yeah, so first read Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Yep. Catch up on that. And then we're going to go on to Rule of Life, and we'll do links for that. Yep, and it's a sort of a workbook that has these rhythms. You'll probably, with the Rule of Life, you'll probably read the first section, pause, and then join us in the conversation in the year and come back to that workbook over and over. That's how that workbook sort of works.
Imagine that. Also, did you know that there is an emotionally healthy assessment online?
I did not.
Have you taken it?
I have not.
Okay, I'm going to send you the link to that so that you can link it in the show notes too.
Great.
I haven't taken it either because I just found it when I was prepping for the podcast today.
Totally. This is a really interesting idea for me, and I'm just spitballing here.
Oh, great.
But I think we should take it and then sort of review it on within the weekly.
Yeah. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I'll commit to it depending on what I get.
Me too. No doubt. We've got to work on that ladder of humility, don't we?
That's right.
Hey, Calvary, we're really just so thankful that you're listening in, you're joining along, that you're picking up these books, you're implementing it in your studies, your men's groups, your women's groups, your life groups. It's so fun to hear your stories. When I meet you, at Walgreens, if I run into you at church, if I'm on a different campus, always stop, say hi, tell us what you're learning. You can always write us at theweekly@calvarybible.com as well.
And let me know if you want to come over and have a cup of tea.
Yeah, Melissa, you can always find her on Instagram. I am not on Instagram anymore. Okay, but I want to leave you with this. And this is one of my favorite quotes from the book. It says, Christianity is not about our disciplined pursuit of God, but about God's relentless pursuit of us. Friends, if I could leave you with today anything, is know that God is pursuing you. He loves you. He cares for you. He wants to be with you. And let us just relax, enjoy, pay attention to what God is doing among us, right?
That's right.
Well, this is so much fun.
Always
I can't wait
fun.
to open up the tea. Probably not tonight because it has caffeine.
It's green tea. It's caffeine free. Isn't it?
No,
Some green teas are.
Oh.
I think this one is.
Okay. Hey,
Maybe I should
Calvary.
double check.
Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.
Bye, friends.